The purpose of today's activity is to figure out how to tackle the rhetorical analysis essay, which is question 2 on the AP exam. Here is a sample, and you also have one in front of you. This is the second question on the exam. You are allotted 40 minutes suggested time. You could take more time, but the suggested time is 40 minutes for this portion of the exam. But to be able to understand the text itself, we are going to work today on a close reading annotation strategy called the left-right read, and this will help you get through the text, read it closely, annotate it well, so you're prepared to write a successful rhetorical analysis essay. So, this strategy is called the left-right read. I'll explain its purpose in a minute, but first let me talk to you about why we use this reading strategy. This is an annotation strategy which will help you slow down your reading of the text, identify features of the text that support the author's purpose, help you build a word bank to describe the author's purpose, and reduce a misreading of the text. We call it a left-right read because on the left column of the rhetorical analysis text that you are given to read, you are going to fill out abstract words to identify what feelings the sentences evoke. On the right side of the text, you are going to identify rhetorical features that the author uses to convey their message. Here is what one looks like when it is completely finished. To complete a left-right read, you will need 2 different colored highlighters, which are right here for you.
Thank you.
You will underline each sentence in an opposite color, which means every time you hit a period, you pick up your other pen and you underline in a different color. So you have a red and a purple pen there, so you're going to underline your first sentence in red, your second sentence in purple. After you have completed that part of the task, you are then going to write abstract words that correlate with the text on the left side, and then on the right side, any text feature you find worthy. It could be a shift in tone, it could be a particular type of diction, it could be a particular type of syntax. So before we start, just a couple of definitions. Abstract nouns are words which refer to intangible things like your feelings, ideals, concepts, and qualities. Rhetorical features are stylistic devices that an author uses or a speaker uses to convey to the listener or reader the meaning through the text. This is what it actually would look like when you do a left-right read on a rhetorical analysis text. This is an example from George Bush's 9/11 speech. So I'm going to read the text in the middle, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about what's on the left side versus what's on the right side, okay? And you'll know already these are highlighted in different colors, okay? So this text reads, this is the opening of the 9/11 speech. Good evening. Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom, came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist attacks. The victims were in planes or in their offices, secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. The pictures of airplanes flying into buildings, fires burning, huge structures collapsing have filled us with disbelief, terrible sadness, and a quiet, unyielding anger. So when you go back through after you have highlighted these sentences in a different colored pen or highlighter, you then try to think about that opening sentence. He starts with good evening, so that does seem terribly friendly, right? And then his second line talks about what happened that day, the purpose of why he is here giving us this speech. And he says, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack. So that seems terribly grave, right? You're the American president and you're trying to tell your audience that something terrible happened on American soil today. So as a reader of the text, you might think about a feeling of like, oh, this is very grave. This is a very serious thing. So that's what you would write on the left side of the text. He then specifies that it happened to everyone. Mm-hmm. Our very freedom came under attack. So then maybe something you would think about, like, it is a tragedy. It's not just a tragedy for one, it's a tragedy for all United States citizens, okay? As you go on in the speech here, in this last line where he says, Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. So to put those words together, you would hope that you might come up with a synonym like horror, for example, to relay what Bush is saying in his speech. Now let's talk a little bit about the right side for a minute. Same idea. He begins with a greeting, right, which is a feature of the text. And then here is where you might want to note the fact that he is regularly using the our pronoun. He is also continuing with this sound imagery of D, right? When he says in this opening line, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our freedom, that means it happened to all. So that's a feature of the text, and he is trying to speak to everyone, okay? So then you also have this sound imagery of the D, right? Despicable acts of terror. So hearing that D is like harsh sound. So those are the things that you want to think about when you talk about a rhetorical device. Many students will think, I need to identify I need to find like a fancy device, like a simile or a metaphor. You don't necessarily need to do that. You just need to find like a subtle feature of the text that the speaker is trying to convey their message. So the reason that you do this here is because then it gives you an idea of how to write about what Bush is trying to convey in this speech. So this is now your word bank. All of the words that you have on the left side is your word bank to describe what he's doing. And what he's doing is the rhetorical devices on the right-hand side. Okay. That's how this looks as an analysis. So you've got your speaker, George Bush, 9/11 address to the nation, audience, utilizes a mix of grave and vengeful diction, a description of what kind of words he uses to unify the nation after the day of destruction on American soil. And note here that the choice of day of destruction is from the writer's perspective because you've got that sound imagery of the D, so you're making that connection in your own analysis of the text. Bush achieves his purpose of reminding the country of our strengths by establishing a sense of inclusiveness through his use of plural pronouns, detailed descriptions of the terror with imagery and cataloging those specifically impacted to calm our fears. So in the end, that's what your thesis would be for the rhetorical analysis essay. And then as you were going through the essay, into its completion, you would begin by identifying how that diction is being effective to unify our country, how the sense of inclusiveness is helping all of America to get on board with the idea that we're here to support each other in this tragedy. And then to understand from a detailed description of the imagery and the cataloging of the events where he lists what happened to different types of people, he is trying to convey not just one single American was affected by this. It was all types of different Americans. And then you would detail that throughout your essay. But this is your plan. This is your thesis, your main idea, and then you would execute the rest of your essay using this as your guide. So now it is your turn. You are going to read this text silently once. It is not the Bush piece. It is another piece. You are going to read it once without touching it. No pen, nothing. You're going to read it once. You are then going to highlight every sentence in a different colored pen. After you have done that, you are going to use this abstract word list that I've posted here to build the left side. Now, the right side is a little bit more challenging. For the right side, when you have to identify the rhetorical device features, first you must consider the situation. What is the piece? The George Bush piece, addressed to the nation after a major tragedy. This piece's rhetorical situation is here in your introduction, okay? And after you read this essay in its entirety, we will talk about that rhetorical situation a little bit more. But as you are reading through it, you might want to consider if it was a eulogy or a college graduation piece or an election piece, what is the purpose? Why is the author speaking to this audience or conveying this message? And then in particular, who is the audience? For example, in the George Bush piece, it is all U.S. citizens, right? And he conveys that. So you want to think about who this speaker is speaking to. After that, you want to focus on different features in the text. Perhaps it is the length of a sentence. Perhaps it is a long sentence that's followed by a short sentence, and what might that mean? What might that convey? You want to watch for the use of pronouns, possibly. This could be to establish some credibility, as George Bush does when he says our nation, right? He is connecting with his audience that everybody was impacted by this, or their emotions in some way. Plural pronouns make an audience feel included. Second person pronouns try to separate a speaker from their audience in some ways, and that might be something that you would note in this text. Also, watch for punctuation choices by an author. A hyphenated sentence to link an idea, an exclamation point, seems to be a pretty obvious one for many students, a question mark, and then maybe every once in a while you get your personification, your simile, or your metaphor, which are pretty easy for us to identify and then to explain. So here's the easy roll. The left side, feelings, emotions. When you're reading it, what words are coming to mind? How are you feeling? And you would jot those down. The right side, features of the text. You want to aim for 5 abstract words for every 10 sentences. So that means every time you see 2 sentences together in a different color, you want to try to find 1 word to be able to describe those 2 sentences. On the right side, you want to try to be able to identify 2 to 3 features of the text every 10 sentences. So aim for like at least 2 in a paragraph like this. So this strategy can be difficult to adapt, but the more you do it, the more practice you have, the better you may get at it. So if you can be successful on a rhetorical analysis left-right read, you will be able to argue through close analysis how an author purposefully articulates and conveys their message to an audience in a particular circumstance, which is the purpose of the rhetorical analysis essay. So every time we do a rhetorical analysis essay, you will be required to do a left-right read. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes to read this text silently, and then we're going to just move on to the next step together. Okay. So now that you have gone through the left-right read strategy, I see that you've written your abstract words here on the left, which is great, and you've written your features in the text on the right. Let's talk about the word you chose here on the left. Can you talk a little bit about one of the words that you chose over here?
Yeah, conflicted.
Okay, so that's a really great identification. What made you say that this speaker was conflicted? Perhaps that she says here, I'm less happy than you might think and more challenged.
Yeah, right there. She was conflicted on both. She was saying both of them.
Right, she's on both sides of it.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a really good identification there. That's a good feature. So over here, you also identified that she has this hyphenated complex syntax, which is a really good feature of the text where she has this very, very long sentence, but she's got those hyphens in there, right? So within those hyphenated sentences, it connects with that idea of her being conflicted.
Okay.
Wouldn't you say? Because she's kind of saying both things, right? Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about a rhetorical situation, okay? So in a rhetorical situation, just like when I spoke about the Bush piece, in the rhetorical situation, we need to think about who our speaker is. Who our speaker here is, her name is right here at the top.
Claire Booth
Lucci.
Lucci.
Claire Booth Lucci.
Yep.
And just before her name, what does it say she is?
She's an American journalist and politician.
Okay. What year is it?
1960.
Okay. It's okay if you don't know the answer to this, but when I say 1960, what comes to mind? Anything? Do you know anything about 1960? No. Okay. So when I think about, like sometimes when you're writing a piece, you think about, okay, where are we in America? Have we just, did we enter war? Who was our president at the time, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes it is helpful to know sort of a little bit of historical background, right? But we know it's 1960. We know our speaker is female, okay? Those are all important things. And our speaker is also a journalist herself, okay? So let's talk a little bit about her audience. Who is her audience in this piece. Can you see here in the introduction?
The American press?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. She has been invited to speak to journalists
Yep.
at the Women's National Press Club.
Yep.
Okay? So, at the very end of the speech, this is an important note. It says this is your task as the person who's writing the essay. In a well-developed essay, analyze how Lucci uses this introduction to prepare her audience for her message. So this piece in front of us is just her introduction.
Okay.
Do you have any questions about that?
No.
Okay.
No, that makes
All right.
sense.
And she's preparing her audience for her message. Okay.
Okay.
And do you know what her message is? Do you know what she's trying to convey?
Sacrifice, right here, is this it? Sacrifice journalistic integrity in favor of the perceived public demand for sensationalist stories?
Very
Would
good.
that be it?
That's exactly
Okay.
it. You are correct. You are correct. That is exactly it. So when you originally noted that that she was conflicted, right?
Yeah.
Can you now see she's a
Yep.
speaker.
Yep.
She's a journalist.
Yep.
And she's speaking to other journalists.
Mm-hmm.
So conflicted is a really good way to describe how she's going to try and prepare her audience for
Yep.
her speech, right?
Yep.
So now we've got our speaker down. So we
Mhm.
know it's a female. We know she's a journalist. Her audience is,
The American press.
and the occasion is,
The Women's National Press Club.
and her purpose is,
That's the sacrifice journalistic integrity in favor of the perceived public demand for sensationalist stories.
correct. So now that we know who our speaker is, she's female. She's a journalist herself. We now know that her audience is the national press. And we know as a journalist, speaking to journalists, she is conflicted
Yeah.
in what she has to say to them.
Yeah.
So that is her purpose, to identify journalistic integrity. Okay?
Yeah.
So let's return back to the word that you chose here on the left, which was conflicted.
Yep.
And let's connect that with that complex hyphenated syntax that she has over here. And we can think about how she analyzes the issue that she must present her audience with. Because don't forget, is this the whole speech? No. Right. It's the introduction. And note here, it says, how does she prepare her audience, right? So in her honesty of being conflicted, right? That's what we need to think about analyzing when we're going to write our rhetorical analysis essay. So to start your rhetorical analysis essay, you would begin by explaining who our speaker is, not just that she's female, but that she herself is a journalist, that she is speaking to other journalists, and the prompt itself tells you that they're sacrificing journalistic integrity, and that's what she needs to talk to them about. But how does she do it is what we need to establish in the essay, and how she does it is through the devices that you have identified here.
Okay.
Do you have any other questions?
No, that makes sense now. Thank
Okay, you feel good about how you
Yeah.
can write the essay now?
Yep.
Okay, so every single time that you do a rhetorical analysis essay, you want to take at least 5 to 10 minutes to read and annotate and build your word list. Because as you are going through the essay itself, you can then turn back to these words. This is your word bank that you built. These are your devices to talk about what your speaker is doing. And that is how you will create an effective essay.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
Any other questions?
No, it makes sense. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks.